I will kind of introduce the topic and then kind of explain the goal, and then we'll go around and have everyone introduce themselves, and then we'll all kind of have 10-minute spiels, just starting with me. Okay, does that make sense, everybody? So here's the goal of the talk and how it kind of shaped out. So Ma's like, all right, Eugene, you should present. I'm like, well, I'm not gonna give the same talk again. She's like, all right, we made a panel, Eugene, talking about stress. I'm like, okay. And so my thinking of the kind of goal for the talk, the panel is, I imagine my head like, your niece is graduating from college and you're attending the ceremony, and you've got like an hour to give her the advice you wish you had for dealing with stress in the workplace before she goes to work in some state or region far away from you. And so I think the goal today is just talking about boundaries and advocating for yourself and managing stress in the workplace, right? So in terms of introductions, I'll start with me and just kind of go around. So I have an interesting situation where I really do have to be my own advocate in the workplace because I work for myself. So no one else is going to do it. There's no one, who's going to be like, all right, Eugene, you need to stop working at 6, right? And so I do weird things like I have my hue lights turn like an ugly green when it's time for me to stop working for the day. But I do Power BI consulting and I make training content. So just going in the order that my Zoom screen shows me, Dan, what do you, what's your background? What do you bring?
I've been a DBA consultant for the last 5 years. I've done the work from home thing the whole time with that. So I do a lot of travel internationally, and yeah, I've in all the different environments, learning how to, coming out of the corporate world, learning how to advocate for myself, learning how to communicate with management, learning how to communicate with coworkers and the different strategies, and all of that packaged in a person who is an extreme extrovert in an introvert community mostly. So there's some things to have had to learn in that.
All right. So Anna Mae, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Let me put down my coffee. I have a varied background. I've worked in many industries. My primary for a long time was theater and film. As a result, in between, I had to eat and worked in everything. And then a few years ago, I got laid off from the oil industry and retrained in IT, which I've been quite enjoying. I've been kind of a junior all through the pandemic. You'll see why I didn't really move up from junior a little later. And right now I'm working as a data analyst for in politics where I live. It's a parliamentary system, so our elections are 28 days. So if you can imagine all of that in 28 days, and this year I'm doing 3 in less than 12 months. So advocating becomes a thing.
Yeah, no, it's a tight schedule up in Canada. You don't have the like multi-year elections we do in the US. So
we don't play.
Yeah. So all right, Jules. Actually, do you prefer Jules?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm a SQL DBA. I've been working remotely for the past 3 years, I think it is now. So the change during the pandemic wasn't as much of a change for me. And but I've only been in tech for 7 years, and before that I was home for 10 years, and so my pivoting into tech was a little different than most people, who get out of college and then, start their job, and then their career just kind of takes this predictable trajectory. Mine was a little more unusual.
Right.
So, now I'm a single mom being a SQL DBA.
I'm sure you know a lot about stress then, so I'm glad you're able to join us for today, right? So I'll kind of start with my 10-minute spiel. So I think a lot of this stuff, part of what came out of like the pre-meeting to like, what does this talk feel like it's supposed to be, was the whole being your own advocate. because one of the things that I learned, just working for myself and working with other people, is that if you don't value yourself and your time, then no one else is going to. And there's no reason that you should expect them to, right? Like, it would be great if, you're just this bumbling 20-year-old who doesn't know what your boundaries should be, and like everyone just pulls you aside and be like, hey, you have some dirt on your face. Like, why are you working weekends? You're just, hurting yourself, right? And like, it's okay. Like, there's a time and a place for that. But I remember whenever I was at my first like super real job, like I worked a brief stint right out of college, but my first long lasting job, if I was doing work late or I was doing work on the weekends, I would like make sure that I sent an email about it so my boss would see that I was working hard. And now I'm just like, no, I don't have time for that. Like, if we're doing a deployment or something on the weekend, sure, fine. But I started to learn to value my time and respect that. And that's the only way to get other people to do that. And one of the things that was helpful with that, I think, was consulting for me, because I had to put a dollar value on my time. And my husband calls it my BS rate, right? It's how much you have to pay me for me to deal with your BS. And it has raised over time, right? So when I was like fresh out of college, it was like $23 an hour, right? It was not a lot. I would deal with a lot of BS. And then as I like started working for myself, it was still kind of low for a consultant. It was like $80 an hour because I had a mortgage to pay. But over time, as I got more experience and I got more confidence, that number kept going up, right? And so as a consultant, it's how do I put it? It's a blessing and a curse. The curse is that I sometimes do the opportunity cost analysis with leisure activities, right? I'll go watch a movie for 2 hours and be like, I could bill like $200 for this instead, or $300 for this instead. So that's bad. But in terms of valuing my time, knowing that, oh, I could be billing $200 for this or $300 for this, makes it easy to go like, is this worth that? Is this worth whatever amount? Or like a more down to earth comparison, because I know a lot of folks here aren't consultants, but we have a basement apartment and we were renting it out for a while, and we were renting out to like this kid. He was like early 20s, worked at McDonald's, and thankfully he's moved out, but he did a lot of things that 20-year-olds did, and our vents were both good at transmitting noise and smell. And so my husband, was like, this guy's a pain. Like, we rented out to him because, he was us like 5 or 6 or 8 years ago, right? And we kind of pitied him a bit. And I'm like, honey, let's reverse the sunk cost fallacy, right? If someone were to say, I'll pay you $600 a month to deal with these inconveniences, would you do it? And it's like, yeah, the answer is yes. So I think the first thing that I have for people is just figure out how you can value your time and your space, because no one else is going to do it for you. You might have some people that are kind and be like, listen, you're overextending yourself. But in general, that's not been in my experience. And it's not even a malicious thing. It's just like, my boss used to say, we'll give you work until you scream. And I learned that you have to scream or you end up trying to fix printers while also being billable. And it's a bad time, The other thing is learning to like get away from like should and pardon the language, but there was a psychologist who would call it masturbation, where you said, okay, I must have things this way, I should do things this way. And so the perfect example for me is this is a pair of $400 headphones that my business paid for. The business is me, but it's a business expense. And it feels utterly decadent, right? I've got probably $1,000 standing desk that I can raise up. And what was important was realizing that these things make me more efficient. And so a lot of times it's helpful to take the viewpoint of, okay, if you were employing yourself, which I literally am, but again, a lot of you can imagine what that might be like. Or if you were a manager and your employee said, hey, if the business pays for these $400 headphones, then I'm going to be 10% more efficient or 5% more efficient. If I had an employee and they said that to me, I would write the check today, right? But when it comes to doing those same things for myself, I find it particularly difficult, right? Because again, it feels luxurious or decadent or excessive. And so it's been a challenge working for myself, learning to be okay with investing in the resources that help me succeed, right? Whether that's, tools like having headphones or a standing desk, or whether that's setting particular boundaries with work and being like, you know what, when it's 6 o'clock, I leave the office and I'm done, and I'm not making exceptions or excuses or any of that kind of stuff. So that's my 10-minute spiel. Let's go ahead and jump to Anna Mae and hear their kind of 10-minute spiel on dealing with stress and boundaries, and what you would advise, again, that theoretical niece who's graduating college and you're like, oh, honey, you sweet summer child.
That was me. I am recovering from COVID, so I wrote everything down. I expected your 10 minutes to be like a full 10, so I'm a little,
I thought I started at 17. I can BS for another minute.
It's all good. It's all good.
Okay.
Sorry about that. So I'm reading off a page. I'm also autistic with complex ADHD, so my experiences will be a little different than other people.
Absolutely.
I can give a bunch of points and tips, but that for me is boring. I learn from and remember story. I never thought I'd get into computers. I went to a high school that required a base level of computers in the 90s, and I really enjoyed it. I investigated a programming stream, but I was told, no, women don't do word processing. Women do word processing instead. So that's what I did. After school, I ended up in a number of jobs, mostly because I love film, but you gotta eat. So some of those jobs paid me to travel across Canada, live in Milwaukee, Oregon, all kinds of fun things. Sometimes it's hard to think about how a client will interact with our work without understanding how it'll be used, and that history helps me. I was working in oil field safety when I got laid off and got to learn SQL Server. A friend had been showing me a few things, and I found a program and it was fantastic. We learned SQL Server, Cognos, and SPS Modeler. I didn't even have money for a computer at the time, and that SQL friend and another friend found ways to set it up so I could log into virtual machines using a free iPad and my cell phone. One of the best things you can do for your mental health in this industry is plug into the amazing community of data professionals there are around the world. There will be days when you're really stuck and someone can point you to the right blog. There will be days you want to quit and someone will give you a story that sets you on your path. I enjoyed my program, worked really hard, got good grades, and was lucky to land a fantastic practicum with Randolph West mentoring me, and I owe a lot to them. I graduated and learned really quickly that I wasn't even sure I'd learned enough to be calling myself a professional. I think I filled notebooks with pages and pages of notes, made mistakes, and I'm pretty grateful for a lot of those things. In our first client meeting, I learned my first boundary, and that's the boundary with myself. I heard so many words and things flying around that I'd never heard before. I tried to keep my mouth shut and not look ignorant. I took enough notes that my arm hurt, and I think the client might have liked me. I went home, poured over my notes to see what I could learn to try to contribute to our project, and found this program called Del Boomi. I found some courses online and figured I was going to learn this whole thing in one night. I spent the entire night poring over material, watching videos, trying demos, and showed up the next day hoping to contribute. I was not my most effective, having not slept, and that was noticed. I admitted I'd stayed up late and tried to learn it all. My mentor graciously listened to me and what I'd learned, and we tried out a few things for the project. I ended up going home early that day and slept. So the first lesson I learned in workplace mental health is that I need boundaries with myself, where to stop, how to be smart about it. I need to be firm with myself to understand that I am new and I can't know everything. You can't learn all there is to know in any field in any day, and trying will make you sick. I finished my practicum and ended up work with a local agency that works with autistic folks and was placed in a job. Funny enough, they sponsored me to go learn Del Boomi, and I'm now a certified architect in it. Which, it was great because I had job coaches to help me manage the ways autism rubs against the workplace and find accommodations. I firmly believe that the accommodations that we as autistics need would make a mentally healthier workplace in general. Being allowed headphones, being allowed to move, sit, stand. We had a designated walking hallway where you could take a book or a tablet and absorb the new thing you're learning. Having private offices, and one of the big accommodations we got was a fierce protection of our time. Breaks were mandatory. They'd make us get up and leave our stations for a change of pace. It made problems easier to work on and the day seemed faster. You'd get absorbed in a project and suddenly it's break time. If at all safe and possible, protect your breaks for your mental health. I understand not every workplace is good for this, but if you're safe to do so, do it. In fact, when I transition to working at home, I do the same. When that timer goes off, I get up, I cook myself a meal, go for a walk, cuddle my parrot, and I come back. My second huge lesson learned was to protect my time. I usually do 1:15 in the morning, half hour at lunch, and 15 after. Early on in my new job, I had a royally bad day. I accidentally deleted a client database, and I still feel physically ill thinking about that. When it happened, I immediately felt a little bit like I was gonna die inside, and then sent a message to the CTO and my job coach because of accountability. It was a rough morning, and that break afterwards was a life preserver I didn't know I needed. I went and tweeted to the SQL fam and said, I made a mistake. Please tell me about your biggest mistakes to cheer me up. I went back to work feeling good about getting it off my chest, continued my day, and got to work fixing my mistakes. At lunch, I came back to Twitter and found so many positive and uplifting stories and folks jumping into the trenches to lift my spirit out. By the end, I was grateful to community and very much thanking the well-tested backup gods. That day, I learned a few things technical and mental health wise. Technical, learn ways to save yourself from yourself. And mental health, find a community that will support you and cheer you on. Early on in this new career, I ran hard into sexism at this job and it sucked. Things like having the keyboard pulled out of my hands during paracoding sessions because my partner felt women code too slow. Being slagged regularly in front of the entire team and the CTO, being ignored, and stuff I won't even mention. I wrote things down and went to my job coach and HR and had a meeting where I was told all the things female IT professionals should be doing, and it was very sexist. I felt ill thinking about going to work 3 months into a new career. I was no stranger to male-centered work, but nothing had been quite so aggressive and soul-crushing. I often left work feeling like the worst coder ever. The next day, COVID hit and we were shut down and sent home. I got to work from home for a few weeks until our project was also shut down and we were out of work. It gave me a minute to think and breathe, and I realized I was really, really unhappy, and I wasn't sure if it was the workplace or the industry. I called my mentor and some friends and was talked out of quitting. I told them I was ready to quit, and none of them would allow that. I learned to walk away, but don't walk too far away. Find a better work situation, and I promise this industry needs you. You have unique skills and talents that nobody else does. The industry is better for our variety. But you shouldn't put up with abuse to work in this industry. Toxicity shouldn't be the norm. While working from home, I'd learned a couple other workplace wellness things I'm taking beyond the pandemic. Get up and move in the morning, go for a short walk. I need routine with my autism, and the exercise gears my brain up so that my brain knows that today is a work day. On a weekend, I don't do that, so my brain kind of gets the idea. With the pandemic, I started thinking about nutrition again. I previously studied nutrition. It can be really easy to skip the dishes in a pandemic, but I found myself feeling better after lunch if I had some salmon and a salad instead of a cheeseburger. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with cheeseburgers. They are fantastic. But I feel like we all have a way of eating where we feel fueled and energetic. There's many ways to eat that are healthy and fulfilling. And early in the pandemic, I'd been eating food that wasn't doing that. So my lesson was eat in a way that makes me personally feel good. One of the things for me was learning to set boundaries with my spouse and household, including myself. I had all this pressure to do all the cooking and cleaning because I was now the one who was home. Never mind that I was working. I needed to learn to make boundaries to share the household load, and I found an app called 2D from another SQL fam member, Tracy Boggiano, who's great if you're neurodivergent, for tips, where I could not only set a schedule so I didn't try to do the whole house in one day, but also share chores with myself or my spouse. I found a big issue with work from home was bleed from work into home. And we recently moved and I'm building an office in the basement so I can have that physical barrier for myself and spouse. At the end of the workday, I'll be able to close the door and leave work. I've learned sometimes that work needs a physical barrier. Until my office is ready, I have a blanket that I throw over my computer at the end of the day when I'm done working. And then when I'm working, it goes on the living room. Also, it works to keep parrots off both. And then I got COVID. Ended up with long COVID and some weird memory problems. I've had a hard time sharing this because it's hard to talk about this in the IT community. I'm struggling with my coding and SQL knowledge since having COVID. Weird head stuff happens when you get COVID, but rehab has also taught me good things that are important for mental health. One is sometimes you need to laugh at yourself. There's nothing like being on Zoom with a bunch of rehab buddies and straws hanging out of your mouth. I also promptly learned after laughing that breathing is important. A big thing for me is not to be too hard on yourself. There's been a lot of really frustrating things like trying to find my way to the grocery store, and it's easy to get angry. Once I started to slow down and stop being hard on myself, I found myself getting faster and learning faster again. Another thing I learned from COVID is always be a lifelong learner. I'm having to relearn a lot and be patient in how I do it. That's okay. I got into this industry knowing that learning would be a thing. And I think for mental health, it's good to learn things outside of data, like photography, piano, dance, whatever you want to do. As I was rehabbing, an interesting opportunity came along to be a data manager for a friend as she first ran in city politics and now provincially. Explain the parliamentary system so you all understand how bananas 28 days is. And you know, we sort of know when an election is coming because there's the 4-year limit, but they can call them whenever they feel like it. Politics is super weird. There's some funny prep time where you're trying to get it ready because you know it's coming, and then all of a sudden it's crunch time for 28 days. Our city run was reasonable, but I did have surgery halfway through just for fun in a pandemic. But I woke up feeling better than I ever had. I just didn't know how to handle feeling really good. I had surgery on Monday, and that Wednesday we had our local user group, and I snuck out of bed to come down and try to co-host it downstairs, even though I was told not to. I was bored, and my body said, "What the heck are you doing?" And my spouse came by and said, "What the heck are you doing?" And I learned that sometimes you have to rest, be it in bed or at a beach, but take breaks. The city election was weird and nobody had data to roll with. So I had a lot of fun learning to come up with a way to do that without data. The provincial one was very hard. I had a data set, but had no idea what I was doing, and I was making it up on the fly with a brain that was still healing. I worked really crazy hours and it hasn't been fun, but I learned in the last maybe 7 days of that writ that there are in fact tasks that I could be sharing with non-data folks on the team. I just had to learn how to teach them how to use my stuff. Suddenly that week I started to breathe, and luckily my numbers worked out great and we won in a landslide and have a Blackfoot woman nominated to the party. We're in another waiting period for a provincial election, which can be between tomorrow, because there's the leadership thing, and May. And this will be the biggest data project I ever work on. But now there's a party and tools and other people who can lighten my load. So the last really big lesson I learned is that delegation meant time to breathe and time to spend time with my spouse. Hopefully the next time I will do a little better at that than the last couple. Anyways, that's what I've learned as a neurodivergent in my first 2 years in the industry.
All right. I think you definitely nailed it. Also, definitely recommend your own advice of breathe, because that was a lot
Right.
in 10 minutes. Take a breath. But no, that was a lot of that stuff resonated for sure. Right.
With autism, I really struggle with public speaking. So I'm like trying to
Totally
not
understand.
freak out.
No, you did a great job. And I totally, the accommodations make sense of like, you know what, I've got some structure here. Everything else could be on fire, but I'm reading this. So, and I think one of the things for me is like we all have this kind of wood grain to our souls, right? And if we go with the grain, we succeed, and if we go against it, we struggle. And I think with autism, sometimes that grain is more clearly defined, sometimes, or more visible. But like you don't have to be on the spectrum to still have that grain, right? So I think there's a lot of things that people can definitely learn. So Dan, you want to tell us your thoughts on dealing with stress in the workplace?
Yeah, so I kind of broke mine down into 4 different areas. How do I break it down with management? How do I break it down with coworkers, with the community, and with family? I think one of the biggest things when I've gotten to any employer, anybody in management, anybody who has kind of some type of authority over me, I like telling them up front, hey, real quick, this is how I need to have feedback. You know, I need, as a extrovert, I need feedback directly. That's how it works for me. And I find letting people know who are you're reporting to how you need to receive feedback, and even what's the frequency of that. So I ask, say, I want feedback direct. I don't want you to beat around the bush. If I did something wrong, call it out immediately, because otherwise, for my own mental health, I have to assume that if you're not going to let me know that, hey, that process you did was wrong, or the way you interacted in that email, I'd like you to fix it a little bit. I have to assume it's right. Otherwise, I got to a point mentally that, unless someone tells me I'm right, I must be doing something wrong. And at that point, I had to change that context in my own mental health. So I always start off, hey, this is how I need my feedback. And for me, it's very direct. I let them know I want to do one-on-ones with my direct, manager. And I'd like to do them about every 2 weeks, just to check in, even if it's 15 minutes to say, hey, work's going great, but I'd like to tell you, update you about some stuff with my family. Having been in work from home for the last 5 years, I can feel really disconnected. And as an extrovert feeling very disconnected, it was very hard on my mental health. Not having colleagues that I used to just be able to get up and walk to a cubicle and just have a quick chat with to kind of, boost my battery, so to speak. So also, when I was working with my management, I have let them know, hey, look, context switching is a challenge for me. I let them know what I have to work on. So, if you're going to have Dan do work, Dan needs to get usually like a longer projects. Give me a project that's a 2 or 3 hour deep dive. For what I love doing performance reviews, index analysis, execution plan reviews and all that, taking several hours. I can get in and just, that's my game. That's my bag. And but the constant, hey, if you need to get a hold of me, then I let my coworkers also know, and management know, hey, if you need to get a hold of me, these are also the preferred ways. Maybe it's you want to receive communication via email. Maybe you want them to contact you with, book a time on my calendar, or yeah, it's okay to just message me on Teams or Slack. And then also setting, what is your expectation with work? In the virtual world, with work from home, does your boss need you to be 8 hours billable a day? In consulting, is that what the expectation is? Or is the expectation, 6? Because, we need you to be a human and not just, a workhorse. So having those conversations has always been very helpful. In regards to how I deal with stress and advocate for myself with my coworkers, I check into with my coworkers. Usually I try to have a conversation with them, either maybe at the end of a meeting if we had one, or maybe it was just over Slack or Teams, saying, hey, am I communicating with you in a way that you're receiving me well? I don't always feel like maybe everybody likes to get or give feedback directly. I know that's for me. And so at that point, I touch base and just say, hey, if I've said anything, or the way that, maybe, my sarcastic humor is, if I've been offensive, I would like you to just tell me directly. And that helps really, allow my coworkers to know, hey, I take your feelings as a big consideration. I take who you are as a person and your background and all the pieces of you very personally. It matters to me who you are and who you are in my workspace. And so, for them, the same thing. Do they want me just to message them on Teams if I have something that's, not important? Does that interrupt their flow? And so that's been very helpful. I also have found with working remotely as an extrovert, I need to socialize. And so, bringing up things to the team to say, hey, can we just have a happy hour or something? Doesn't have to be long, doesn't have to be drinks, just a time maybe where we get on and maybe, yeah, we're powwowing about a work issue, or maybe we're communicating about, just what we're going to do that weekend. For me, I recognize how charging that is, how much energy that brings to me, and that helps really reduce stress, finding those aspects and then, letting people know. That way, if my coworker's like, look, that's not my thing, then I know that I'm not expecting that area of my own, needs to be met by, my work environment. And it helps me build where I do need it, whether it's outside of work and other areas. I remember, for an example, in the early days of the pandemic, now I had already been, working from home for 3 years at that point. There were many different companies, people just hosting Zoom sessions. And it was just a way of just getting together. How are we, handling this? How are we, navigating this new situation? And then a lot of people asking me, well, you've worked from home, how do you do it? And it was nice being able to just give some of these ideas and ways to, learn how to communicate and, teaching people how Zoom works and WebEx and Teams and all the other ones. With working with advocating with my family, to touch on what Anna Mae said, it's exactly kind of having that barrier, some type of a physical barrier that I had for the office. Now, early on, it was in the bedroom, wasn't the best setup for me, but later it got its own room. And then eventually now it's on a different floor. It's in the basement, and just learning how to communicate with people, to, with the family members, with my spouse, with my child, to say, hey, if I'm working, I know I'm at home, but I need you to understand that this is just the same as if was outside of the house. Some of the other areas with the family were, yes, I don't have a commute now. My commute's 30 seconds to walk up the stairs. So I need some decommissioning time. I need some cool down time. It's not just I walk up the stairs and I can be, not necessarily bombarded, but give me some time. Let me just relax. Let me sit on the couch and just breathe. And to have that cool down time before I started getting into the events of the family. Some other areas, if I'm not the one on call, don't check emails. If work needs me, hey, look, I'm not going to be checking my emails outside of work. I'm not going to be checking Teams. If I'm not on call and something is absolutely urgent, then you're going to have to call me, because I'm not going to keep checking in. This is my boundary. This is where I'm now on my time. And again, communicating those things so it's not just an assumption. Working alongside with my wife, or if you have housemates, help schedule household chores. Any chore in our house, my wife and I, is a household chore. It's not my wife's chore, it's not my chore, it's whoever has time, we work on it, and we work on it together. And that's helped out with a lot of the stress. We're not expecting one person to just, oh, that you're supposed to do that. And then lastly, how do I help, advocate with the community and with handling stress? Is I really want to help create a welcoming community that's and to be approachable and teachable. I don't have everything correct, and I know that. I like approaching people and say, look, if I've said something wrong, tell me. If I've used, wrong verbiage, or if I've said something, hurtful, I will absolutely apologize, and I want to build this community better. And I want to be able to be there and helping others to be there if they're not feeling welcome. I currently also teach and private tutor people into the data community, and that's absolutely been wonderful. Joining this community has absolutely changed my life, and I want to do everything I can to give back. In giving back, giving of myself is, as an extrovert, it helps me be a part of this community, and that actually helps de-stress me.
All right, I think we're coming on time. Good stuff,
Yep,
Dan.
I had a second left.
Oh, did you? I'm sorry. You had actual timer. I should have done that. Again, I apologize. I was like, okay, it's like 27, so I just need 10 minutes, and clearly that was a faux pas. But that was great stuff, and I like how you had to find boundaries with all these different. I hate to use the word stakeholders because it sounds like business BS, but it kind of is, right? All these stakeholders in your lives, your boss, yourself, your family. So last person we have, and then feel free to actually we're getting pretty close, but we may have a little bit of time for questions. Jules, tell us how you deal with stress in the workplace and you advocate for yourself.
Well, happily, the other people already covered some of the things that I was going to cover, so
Sweet.
I can bring it down.
Yeah.
The big one that I had in mind that I haven't heard covered before is like setting expectations, especially with in regards to work. The thing that can be most stressful at work is like the amorphous feeling of not knowing if you're meeting expectations or not. And that's one thing that has been huge in my current job at Rev.io, is that the expectations are extremely clear, and not just a matter of like, you need to improve SQL performance, or just make things better, but to have very concrete ideas about what that is, about measurable metrics. It's like we need to get this procedure from this to this. We need to improve CPU capacity from this to this. We need IO to change this much. Having concrete, actionable goals is huge in reducing stress, because you're not just wondering, it's like, okay, well, what do I need to tackle today? You already have your list. No, it's just, you need to do these things, and that's going to be what you tackle. And once those are complete, you know that you've done your job. So that when it comes time to like evaluate your own performance, you already have your list of, these are the things that I've done, and these are the things that have gotten better. And it's really important to document that stuff to yourself too, so that when it's like I've got a running document where I say, like, what did I accomplish this week? What did I accomplish this month? And I can look back and I can see, okay, these are the things that I did. This is where I spent my time, and this is this is the value that I provided to the company, which feeds into building your confidence, which is another huge source of stress, right? Is like, am I really good at my career? How am I comparing to everyone else? And having concrete information to be able to compare yourself to where you think you should be, that can be huge. And another part of confidence building is just always continually learning, because being able to say, okay, between last year and this year, I've learned how to do this and that and the other. I've taken these Azure courses. I've improved myself by this much. Those are huge confidence builders too. And just building your confidence, building your sense of accomplishment in your current role and in your career, those are huge in managing stress. And of course, the other part to managing stress is that we cannot positive think ourselves out of actual mental health problems. And so if you think that you are that you've done everything that you can in managing your stress, and you're still having problems, maybe it's time to talk to a mental health professional. And happily, we live in a time where that doesn't have nearly the amount of stigma that it did 20, 30 years ago. You may have a thyroid problem. You may have an anxiety disorder, and you can't yoga yourself into not having that. Those are just chemical, physical, medical problems with your body, and they need to be addressed if you're going to get better. And so don't be afraid to seek help when you need it.
Yeah, that's all great stuff. Also, I realize I continue to be bad at time, because we started at 15 after, and I'm like, oh no, we're ending on the hour, but we've got some time for questions. It looked like Ralph might have a question, or at least Mala said Ralph can.
Yeah, Leslie is the host now. Leslie, can you unmute Ralph for his question?
We will see. Leslie's also muted, just in a different place.
Can you not hear me?
We can hear you now.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So now I got to get to attendees. Ralph, allowed to talk.
There we go.
All right,
Oh,
Ralph.
he raised his hand. All right.
All right, Ralph, can you
He's still muted. He's visible. I see him.
ask?
Well, he needs to unmute himself and talk.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
What's your question, Ralph?
Well, I don't really have a question. I was just
Yeah.
making a commentary about working from home as an introvert.
Yeah. So I'll let everyone else give kind of their feelings, but for me,
So
the
was the question how to deal with working from home as an introvert?
No,
Is that what he
it was,
said?
how do you define it, right?
How do you define it? Okay.
So I find this a really interesting question because society says that introversion is being shy and small and just wanting to live in a cave. And I consider myself an introvert, and I'm none of those things, right? I'm big and loud and boisterous, and I put on a performance and all this kind of stuff. And the best definition that I ever heard was that introverts lose energy from social activities and extroverts gain energy from social activities. And the thing is, it can still be enjoyable, but you know what? Like a hike in the woods is enjoyable, but you may have sores on your feet at the end of it, right? And so the analogy that I use a lot of times is it's like those old taxi cab meters. If you come to me, like if you're my coworker, I don't have any coworkers, I have a dog, but back when I did, if you were to come to me like, Eugene, how about them Stillers? How about the Steelers? Let's talk about football, right? Or let's talk about dogs. A little taxi cab meter starts running. And my initial impression is like, oh no, this is going to be a $5 conversation about your dog, Sparky. I don't know if this is worth my time, right? And so for me, I tend to lean towards more in-depth, substantive conversation. I used to hate small talk because it started the taxi cab meter. And I've learned that sometimes that small talk is grist for the mill, and that's how you get into the more engaging stuff, but also that like extroverts are weird and they just like talking about anything, right? You can be like, there's like,
Right.
there's clouds outside and it's warm and I saw a tree today and they're like, that's amazing, tell me about that tree. And I'm like, what is going on? So different people are different, and someone had mentioned the whole Myers-Briggs thing, and even if you don't believe in a lot of like those personality tests, that was formative for me in my 20s, just being like, oh, different people are different. So that's the definition I personally like. Everyone else is welcome to jump in with how you define introvert, extrovert, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's where you deriving your energy. Does a social interaction give you energy, or does it take energy to do it? So
yeah.
And I think most people are not like binary one or the other. It's more of a spectrum. You know, some people are, you know, extremely one or the other.
Right.
But most of us are somewhere in the middle. It's kind of a middle.
A lot of it is the transaction cost, right? So you think about it like Jules, if you're BSing with Jen, you know her well and you feel safe and trusted. And so that transaction cost is a lot lower. So you might have very little energy expenditure. But if you're talking with a bunch of strangers and you don't know them and you're on stage, that's very different. So it's a good point. It's not a binary. I think Anna Mae was going to say something.
Yeah, it's kind of something I've been puzzling with another friend who I worked with who's also autistic, is because social engagement for a lot of us, it's a lot of work for a lot of different reasons. I can accidentally do, one of the ways we like to relate to other people is share special interests. I love hearing about people's special interests because I get to know who you are. But we were talking because my husband early on had noticed that I hit a wall and can't be around people. And I do what you talk about, Eugene, where I put on this huge show. Like, I studied acting growing up, and I think part of that was to learn to appear normal. And he and I were talking, and he goes, you know, I kind of wonder if we would be extroverts if we weren't autistic. And I was like, could be.
Yeah. my husband and I both value that, like, we will look at each other and be like, I'm going to aggressively ignore you for the next hour, and the other person doesn't get offended, and it's just great. It's good. It's funny because I've been told, like, sometimes we'll be like, all right, I'm done with people, and I'm like, but you're hanging out with me. It's like, oh, you're not people, and I don't know whether to be offended or, you know, or compliment. I don't know, but I totally get that.
So back in the before times when we went to SQL Saturdays and got to be like present and in person and doing things, as a mostly introverted person, I mean, I like to be at my house and you know, do my quiet things. When I'm at a SQL Saturday,
Yeah.
It's my speaker persona, right? I'm out there, I'm talking to people, I'm doing that interaction, and instead of a taxi meter, for me, it's my battery, right? I have my energy battery that I'm willing to expend with people. And when we get to the end of the day and everybody's like, oh, let's go to the after party, I'm like, nope, I'm going back to my hotel room. I've had enough of you people. I'm not interested in talking to anybody else at all today. I need to go be by myself. Love you all. I'm out.
Yeah, that was a great question, Waf. Did that answer things for you? Yes, no, maybe. I'm going to take silence as a resounding yes. We all did a great job. Does anyone else have any other questions? We still have a good solid 10 or 15 minutes. If anyone has any questions, or just worst case, we'll talk about
I
more
would say
stories.
for me,
Yeah.
the self-care part, especially working at home, is I have my office. I come in here in the morning, I work, and at the end of the day, I close the door. Like my husband hears the door close,
Sure.
and he's like, oh, you're off from work. I mean, that's like the signal. And
Yeah.
and it's a very clear delineation between my work area and, not being at work. I think that's a really important thing, that if you're going to work from home, you have to do that separation and not be always, oh, I'm just going to run back there and check the email one more time. Nope. I close the door and I'm done.
Yeah. Interestingly, I mean, we talked a little bit about how gender interacts with some of these things, and self-care as a male is difficult, right? Because my cultural understanding of what self-care meant was like bath bombs in the bathroom. You know what I mean? Like there was this idea of this very feminine, culturally feminine ideal of, candles and bath bombs and all this stuff. And it felt, again, decadent. And as someone who was raised like by German grandparents, like, my dad, and like, I'm at least 50% German. So my inner in touch with my feelings was not great. I was like, well, no, I don't need all of that. I'm supposed to be strong. Like if any of you've seen like Encanto, I'm Luis,
Stoic.
I feel like I hold everything up.
Eugene.
But one of the things that helped me is, again, as I started working for myself, like just the raw capitalist mindset of, okay, well, what does the business need? And the business needs Eugene to get 8 hours of sleep, and it needs Eugene to take breaks, and it needs Eugene to have friends and go outside, right? And so, again, it was so helpful to get away from, what some people might call toxic masculinity, or just cultural norms, or whatever you want to call it, to be like, well, okay, what's effective? And it turns out being nice to yourself is more effective, just in general, right?
So I kind of have a perk. My husband is a massage therapist, so it's easy for me to get massages when I want one, but I totally
nice.
recommend having a massage therapist.
Right.
And then there's probably a mobile one where you live too. And that's even better, because they come to your house and they sit up at the table, they do their massage, and then you move to your couch and you don't ruin all of the hard work that they just did by like driving somewhere. So I would totally recommend finding a mobile massage therapist in your local area.
I have an autism question in the chat, if that's okay.
Yeah, please. I just want to wait and see if you were comfortable answering that, so I didn't bring it up.
For sure. It's kind of maybe an important one for anybody who's assigned female at birth. In the 80s, it was not believed that we could have autism. And so we always knew something was different. I would melt down in the grocery stores. People would tell my mom to take care of her Arwood kid, all kinds of really fun, weird stuff. And then my sister was getting tested for dyslexia, and they kept going. I think they did what would have been referred to at the time as an Asperger's test on my sister, and they kept going, this is our other kid. And the psychologist is like, oh, that kid is fine. When I hit high school, a lot more things became apparent. I was having some pretty regular meltdowns. And I went for testing, and again, there was oh, you're a girl. So they tested me for ADHD. And while I was in there, she goes, I think you have Asperger's. But there was government cuts to my testing, and it was not finished at the time. And I was told if I end up in university, they'll pay for it. Problem is, when you have undiagnosed autism, you cannot get into university because your grades aren't very good. So when So I knew, but I didn't know if that makes sense. So when I went back to school for databases, I took advantage of the fact that I knew that college would pay for it, and got tested 2 years ago. And the pandemic has also been very helpful in that I've been able to learn to stop masking, because masking is really harmful for me and a lot of people with autism. It leads to quicker meltdowns, or things like me falling asleep at my first SQL Saturday, because I was so busy trying to be the social happy person that I'm like, in this session I really wanted, because I had an exam on it the next day and I fell asleep.
Can you define for people what masking is? Because they may not know in the context of autism.
I apologize. Masking
Yeah.
is like wearing a mask and trying to pretend to be a normal person.
Mhm.
I think that's why I studied acting and music. I was learning how to not talk super loud and try to be like normal people. And prior to COVID in my work life, I would probably have a meltdown once a week, easily, 2-3 times sometimes. So there's me in the stairwell of wherever I'm working, having a meltdown, and then coming back and trying to pretend like I'm fine. And then just being allowed to do things now, like stimming at my desk, having my sound set up in a way that doesn't hurt me, having the lighting set up that doesn't hurt me. I'm lucky to have one once a month now, with being able to just go, hey, I'm autistic, things have to be a little different.
Yeah, really awesome stuff. I think Jen wanted to give some shout outs to specific comments. I know she's been live tweeting the parts that resonated with her, that she particularly liked.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of, I'm actually using those as a crib sheet. First off, Anna Mae, I think the accommodations we autistics need would make a better workplace for everyone. Oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely. I'm not diagnosed autistic, but I have ADHD, which one of my children calls autism light. Which I think is quite funny. There's a lot of overlap. But yeah, absolutely. I've heard that a lot. It's like disability accommodations as well, like, physical accommodations for sidewalks and so forth benefit everybody. Anyway, so that was one. Scrolling down, I want to read all of these out to you, but it's okay. You cannot positive think yourself out of actual mental health problems. Oh my gosh, Jules, yes. Dan, a lot of the stuff you talked about was absolutely spot on and really, really helpful. Like knowing yourself and being able to communicate that's very valuable to say, oh, I need direct communication. I need frequent feedback, and context switching is very hard for me. Like, oh yeah, no, it never occurred to me to actually tell people that I work with.
Yeah, and the other part of it is, to kind of touch on what Eugene had said at the beginning, is if telling this to like my nephew or niece that's just graduated college, well, how do I know how I need my feedback? Then if you're getting feedback that you're having these internal crises, like I did at the beginning, where nobody's telling me that I'm doing good or bad, and I'm internalizing that as, well, I must be doing bad. Because of just different ways that I was raised and different, way I interacted. I had to say, look, this isn't working. I need something different. And I luckily did have some really good managers and leads on teams that were like, well, how about if we just touch base once a week? Just how are your tickets? How is what you're doing? And then I learned from what we tried what I needed. I didn't just come out one day. I was like, oh, I know exactly how I need everything. No,
sure.
You have to try different things. And for me, I need direct feedback, even though sometimes it's the hardest, where someone's like, hey, that thing you did that really sucked and it really didn't work well and you need to stop it. Well, that's hard to hear, but for me, then I can go, okay, well, now I know exactly what the truth is, and I can address it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me think about how there's this idea of common sense, which I think it's like a code phrase for being neurotypical, right? Because certainly I did not grow up with common sense, right? Or at least in a lot of areas. And so I had to learn these things. And so there was my whole 20s, I was just oblivious to a lot of social norms and mores. And so I would, do one of two things. One is Anna Mae, I would come up with these rules for interactions, right? If someone's wearing a nice dress, you tell them, hey, that dress looks nice on you, or something like that. But you also make sure that you don't say it in a weird, creepy way, like, oh, you look really pretty, to your coworker or something, whatever. I mean, there's like a bunch of nested if then statements, right? But then just finding content that just explains things that people take for granted in a way that you just get, right? So, and some of it's like dumb feel good kind of self-help books, like how to make how to influence people and win friends, or whatever it's called. Everyone knows the book. And it's like, oh, people do like talking about themselves, or people do like it when you're nice, or, oh, you know, there's a different book. Oh, small talk helps to get the conversation going. And so there was a long period of time where I needed people to tell me, like, just super directly, like, Dan, because I didn't have that mental model of how other people worked, right? The way I describe it a lot of times is computers have a GPU a lot of times. Like your basic Dell laptop doesn't, and if you were to try to play video games on it, it would be really slow because it's doing software rendering of the video, right? And most normal people, not normal, neurotypical, however you want to put it, but most folks have an SPU. They have a social processing unit, and so they can do, you know, social flops, Terra social flops, like super fast, right? And a lot of us in IT have a really great CPU, but we have to do software rendering for how other people feel. And so it's a lot slower, but we can get there. And that's, you know, it can be really, really exhausting. So yeah, no, that makes sense. Go ahead, Jen.
All right, so I spent a lot of my childhood reading books.
Yeah.
Love fantasy books. And there's always a structure to the conversations, right? In books, when people meet, one person will say something and the other person answers them. And then they ask that question back. And there's this give and take with the conversation, right? And so, and again, small talk makes people feel comfortable, and you learn, oh, people like to talk about themselves. And if I ask somebody, hey, what's your favorite book? Or, you know, where's the last cool place you traveled to? Whatever it is to get the conversation started, they'll sit there and they'll talk and they'll go on. And then I expect in the social norm of things to be asked things back, and they don't. And I'm always like, did I do something wrong? Why didn't they ask me anything? Why didn't they ask me a question, right? I'm always asking, but and it's really hard to deal with those situations when you're just like, I thought the social conversation thing meant I got to talk too. Because that's the way it works in the books. Everybody gets to have their chance. But it's really hard to learn those social rules and figure out other ways to interact with people if that's what you're expecting.
All right. I think we got about 2 more minutes. Did anyone else have anything you want to share? Or Jen, I know you have like a list of tweets. If there's anything else you wanted to bring up.
Oh, I could talk and talk and talk and talk,
I'm
but
sure.
you know, other people can talk and ask questions too. It's fine.
I don't think I mean, does anyone else have any other questions? I haven't seen anything. There may be some hands raised that I don't see because I don't have the participant list up, but attendees, I don't
In the meantime,
yeah,
I did want to say, Leslie, I put it in chat, but I did want to say that A, yes, living my youth in books, and B, that thing that you said and that Jean said earlier about small talk, yeah, kind of the same. And it's like I'm bad with. I'm partly very good at social interactions and partly very bad at them. So like I do tricks and hacks and things. And one of my hacks has been to stop saying, if I go to a conference, you know, in the fall and I see a bunch of people I haven't seen in a long time, I'll do my best not to ask, hey, what's new? Because no one knows how to answer that. But if I say, hey, what are you obsessing about right now? Yeah, people absolutely love to talk about that stuff. And like you, Anime, I love hearing about it.
And Jules would talk about chickens.
It would.
Oh, so much.
Who would
And
like to hear about
bunnies.
livestock? Let's go.
And the bunny.
Yes, exactly.
Mhm.
I would like to hear about chickens.
We'll
Y'all
take
should connect on Twitter.
that's going to be the next Women in Tech Day. Is just animal wifery. Is there a female
Husbandry.
gendered version of animal husbandry? I don't know.
No,
But-
we have to call it husbandry.
A bird day and I'm there. All birds, any kind of bird.
We're chicken tenders.
Livestock management.
Where exactly is the tender?
It's underneath the breast, actually.
Okay.
If,
Right
if
near
you're
the
the one,
nuggets.
if you're the one taking care of the chickens, you're the tender.
Yes.
All right. Great.
On
And I
that
think
note.
I think we're coming up on time. So this has been a wonderful panel. I appreciate everyone sharing their experiences. I think we had a really varied set of experiences, but there was a lot of overlap in terms of like you have to set boundaries, and it's hard to do that if you don't have the confidence in yourself and the self-value to be like, I'm worth putting up fences around my property, right? I'm worth keeping the poachers off my land emotionally. So I think it's really been great. So I appreciate everyone's time.
All right. Thanks very much. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.